Every place has corruption. But this one seemed to really strike a chord with the city.
They trampled all over the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. It was hundreds of cases.
Over 24 more present or former officers from the 39th District could ultimately get busted in this scandal.
This department is broken.
I had a gun right to my face with the revolver pulled back.
He was at war with these folks.
They were police officers and became outlaws, basically.
If you look at the indictment, it was in excess of $100,000 total cash. That's when it really started to sink in that this was a very big deal.
The investigation could be blown at that point. This was our first time. We had to get it right.
When you're at war, sometimes you have to come face to face with your enemy. And that's the bottom line.
Over 12 police officers will soon be facing federal indictments.
This was the worst case of police corruption ever.
The cops were charged with stealing over $1 million in taxpayer funds.
I went from putting handcuffs on people to having handcuffs put on me.
Philadelphia houses some of our nation's greatest historical emblems, including Independence Hall and the iconic Liberty Bell. But the city of brotherly love is most famously immortalized by underdog fighter Rocky Balboa. Unfortunately, the glamour of a movie doesn't quite reflect reality, especially of the parts of the city that are wrought with poverty and crime.
The unfortunate thing about Philadelphia is that the city is very deeply divided.
It's got the vibrant downtown life, but it quickly, can devolve into a dangerous kind of place.
In the 1980s, jobs are being lost and crime is on the rise as drugs take over the streets. And tensions between the community and police are at an all-time high.
As an old retired police chief, that if they fire at any of our police, that we will retaliate in kind, and I can assure you they're going to lose.
It's a ticking time bomb that in 1985 literally goes off. In West Philadelphia, a black anti-government group called MOVE has been residing in a densely populated residential neighborhood. The group has a long history of conflict with authorities and has been cited for a range of offenses including terroristic threats, rioting, and disorderly conduct. On top of that, they've assembled a dangerous cache of weapons. In May 1985, Mayor Wilson Goode orders police to raid the building and evict the group. A violent confrontation ensues, and the decision is made to end it by dropping a bomb on the location.
They wouldn't leave, and there was a clash, and the city resorted to bombing.
The neighborhood was just devastated by this, and it looked like a war zone.
The resulting fire burns out of control, killing 11 people and destroying 61 homes.
The city has been stained with that, and the stain has never been taken away.
By the end of the decade, the situation hasn't gotten much better. In fact, in some parts of the city, it's gotten worse.
My name is James Dambach. I'm a retired lieutenant from the City of Philadelphia Police Department. I made detective in 1985, and then I was transferred to a specialized investigative unit, did special investigations for the police commissioner. We were actually located on the second floor of the 39th District.
The 39th District in North Philadelphia is one of the poorest sections of the city.
You could see that the dilapidation, the abandoned buildings, abandoned lots, trash-strewn lots. It was a very high call area. They received a lot of calls for shootings, stabbings. You realize as a police officer that at any moment you might run into something there. It was difficult being a police officer through the 80s and 90s with the increase of crime, especially the drug trade, because that became very violent and you had to be careful.
With the drug problem out of control, the city needs help. So a special team of officers is assembled. They are called the Five Squad.
Five Squad took you away from doing normal patrol, and you actually worked for the captain of the district. It was a coveted position, so you could wear plain clothes. You work certain hours. You're not on a daily grind of getting police calls for everything from homicide to petty theft.
They are the more aggressive police officers. They're the ones that, aren't necessarily satisfied with riding around in a patrol car, assisting motorists. These are the guys that want to get down and dirty, make arrests.
It was one of the better squads to be in. One of the perks is lots of court time.
A very active police officer can make almost as much as his regular salary, simply just by working overtime and going to court a lot.
The Five Squad has roughly 20 officers. The sergeant in charge is Thomas DeGiovanni, but the de facto leader of the group is a charismatic cop known as Jack Baird.
His name was John D. Baird, but everyone knew him as Jack Baird. He had that kind of personality where he could just overtake everything. And he became the ad hoc supervisor for that unit. I went to the academy with Jack Baird in 1977. He had really striking blonde hair that stood out. I mean, you could see him in a crowd with the blonde hair. And he was tall, he was about 6 foot, 6'1". To be with Jack Baird was a unique situation. He could talk your ear off. He was very smart, very street smart. He was probably one of the best narcotics guys in that area. He could spot a narcotics transaction or a house that's dealing narcotics. He had that knack in ferreting out those things.
Jack Baird's an interesting person. He was seen as overly aggressive, and I think most people in the community did not want to run into him.
On the force, Baird is admired by both his peers and his supervisors.
One thing we should say about Jack Baird is he had a stellar reputation when it came to his evaluations by his supervisors. I think there's a lot of pressure on officers to get higher arrest rates. The police superiors wanted him to produce, and he produced.
In addition to Baird and DeGiovanni, other key members of the Five Squad include Stephen Brown and Tommy Ryan.
There were some ancillary players as well. There were people that would go in and out, but the core group was DeGiovanni, Ryan, Baird, Steve Brown, and that was the group.
Baird and the rest of the Five Squad don't have an easy job rooting out drug dealers and criminals. One of the best ways for them to get intel is by paying informants. One day in February 1991, Tommy Ryan gets tipped off by an informant about a new drug dealer in town, a young African-American man named Hakeem. According to the intel, Hakeem will be in the area of 15th and Ontario Streets that night, and he'll be driving a blue car. Ryan relays the info to Baird, and as the sun goes down, the two set off to bust Hakeem.
Their idea was to arrest him. If he was a big dealer in that area, they could put pressure on him, may give them information about other drug dealers or a person above him who was distributing the drugs.
But little do they know, what happens next will blow the lid wide open on one of the largest and most widespread police corruption scandals the city has ever seen.
All right. My name is Arthur Colbert, and I was a Temple University student in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1991. I grew up in the northwest side of Detroit, Michigan. Yeah, it was a normal middle-class upbringing. My parents wanted me to succeed, so they wanted me to do well in school. They wanted me to just stay out of trouble. As my dad would always say, do the right thing. My sister was going to University of Pennsylvania at the time. She encouraged me to come out to Philadelphia, kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And long story short, had applied to Temple, and that's where I went.
On February 24th, 1991, the then college senior is excited to go on a date with a girl he has recently met.
I called her up and said, hey, what are you doing? Do you want to hang out? I was looking forward to having a good time.
Colbert is driving his blue Toyota Camry.
So it was a chilly winter night, as it can be on the East Coast. And right after I picked up my date, I see lights flashing behind me. There was a squad car behind me, and there were sirens. I wasn't too concerned because I wasn't doing anything illegal, didn't have anything illegal. So I really didn't know what was going on.
Colbert pulls over. Two plainclothes officers get out of the car. Their names, Tommy Ryan and Jack Baird.
They told the person I was with to go home. Then they asked me to produce my driver's license, and they asked me where I worked. I asked them what was going on, and they had no reason to pull me over. They searched my car. They couldn't find anything. Really, they had no probable cause to search the car, but I couldn't find anything in the car. They really should have let me go then.
But Baird and Ryan don't let Colbert go. Instead, they cuff him, throw him in a police van, and drive off. Without probable cause, Baird and Ryan begin to try to shake Colbert down, even though they find nothing illegal. For Colbert, he's at the mercy of two rogue cops.
Right away, I knew something was wrong. I have no clue what's going on here. I had no idea of where I was going or why.
Baird and Ryan take Colbert a few blocks away to an abandoned 3-story house at 1518 West Ontario.
It was just a small house where there was a living room and a chair. And I was just in that chair, handcuffed. They basically said my name was Hakeem and that I'm some kind of drug dealer. So I don't do drugs. I didn't have drugs. They were choking me. They were punching because they were just confident that I was this drug dealer named Hakeem.
Just when Colbert thinks the situation can't get any worse, one of the officers draws his gun and points it right at him.
I had a gun right to my face with the revolver pulled back. So, at this point, all I did was pray.
In February 1991, Temple University student Arthur Colbert is staring down the barrel of a cocked revolver, but he isn't being mugged. He's being threatened by two Philadelphia police officers, Jack Baird and Tommy Ryan. They believe he's a local drug dealer, and they're giving him one last chance to admit his guilt or else.
So I had asked them what their probable cause was, but when you deal with crooked, rogue officers, they're not concerned about having a conversation. They were trying to complete an agenda. These guys have guns. I don't have guns. They got billy clubs. I don't have billy clubs. Oh, I was trying to figure out how to survive.
Realizing their threats aren't working, Baird and Ryan throw Colbert back in the police van and take him to the 39th precinct. There, they lock him in the cell and disappear.
They had no probable cause. I should not have even been detained. I guess I was there for about an hour or two. I don't know. I didn't have a watch or anything.
Around midnight, Baird and Ryan return to let Colbert go. Grateful to be alive, he heads home. When he gets there, however, something doesn't feel right.
I pretty much keep my place neat, but I just noticed that I didn't leave this drawer open. Even little stuff, I can notice that it's out of place.
Colbert suspects someone has been in his place, and he doesn't think it's a random intruder. He believes Baird and Ryan broke in while they had him locked up.
It wasn't anything dramatic. But it was enough for me to know that something was wrong. There were no charges filed against me, but even if there were, the bottom line is that that was way, way, way beyond the scope of what they should have been doing.
Colbert knows his rights have been violated, and he isn't one to let something like that go. The next morning, he walks back into the 39th precinct and files a detailed complaint against officers Baird and Ryan.
Because I knew that the events that occurred were very egregious. And my mindset was to go in and achieve some form of justice.
It's an act of bravery that's about to untangle an intricate dark web of deceit and corruption.
When you're at war, sometimes you have to come face to face with your enemy. And that's the bottom line.
In 1991, Williamson is a rookie agent in the FBI field office in Philadelphia.
There was an older agent there who seemed to just take me under his wing. He walked by one day and he takes this file and he flops it down on my desk. He says, "Hey kid, take a look at this." It was a complaint lodged by Arthur Colbert, a young African-American man who was a Temple student who was accused of being somebody he wasn't, and he had been beaten and roughed up, and he had suspected that these police officers had made entry into his home, so it had all kinds of hallmarks of a real issue. Philadelphia police looked at it, and he sent it down to DOJ to close the case because it didn't seem like there was enough there to go forward with it.
But an alarming and tragic event 3,000 miles away puts the nation on high alert and changes the course of this otherwise closed case. Just 7 days after Arthur Colbert files his complaint, the horrific images of Rodney King being beaten in Los Angeles captivate and shock the country. Across the nation, all eyes are on police officers and their behavior. In Philadelphia, the murmurs of police corruption become cries for justice.
Well, police were very much under the microscope with this story. Things that may have been ignored or accepted by residents were no longer being accepted.
In fact, police corruption in the city goes back decades. From the 1924 probe into 30 corrupt officers, to the early 80s indictment of 3 police superiors for bribery. And of course, the ongoing fallout of the 1985 MOVE bombing. Philadelphia PD has been through more than its fair share of scandals.
This department is broken.
So when Arthur Colbert's complaint lands on Agent Williamson's desk, conditions are ripe for weeding out any and all wrongdoing.
With these national civil rights violations being in the forefront, they said, take another look at it. And it looked like it warranted further investigation.
Williamson soon realizes he needs help.
We need to find somebody who can retrieve information from the police department that the FBI doesn't have immediate access to.
Enter police detective James Damback.
One day I was told that you're going to be assigned to the FBI to work a civil rights case. But then they told me it was about police officers. I had never investigated police officers before. It needed to be done. It's not a job that you relish. There's no relish in investigating, the police officers.
He was very familiar with all these officers. His office was literally above, on the floor above, the 39th District. So he would see these guys every day. He was intimately familiar with the procedures that police officers follow. So it's a tremendous asset to me and the FBI.
One of the first things Williamson and Damback do is interview Arthur Colbert.
He was forthcoming, candid, answered our questions.
He told us that at that time, Jack Baird and Thomas Ryan took him to an abandoned building, a drug house, and beat him, played Russian roulette with him, trying to get him to admit that he was a drug dealer named Hakeem. And he was a decent guy. He was just a nice, normal gentleman. Never had a record at all.
We truly felt bad for him that he had been victimized.
But feeling bad isn't enough. Williamson and Danback need to make sure that Colbert's story rings true. And if it is, does that mean Baird and Ryan are regularly beating, detaining, and pulling guns on innocent civilians?
Civil rights cases are really hard to prove. Oftentimes they become a he said, she said kind of a thing.
These veteran investigators know it's important to have concrete evidence in cases involving accusations against police. So they look for the abandoned house where Colbert said the officers held him against his will and tried to beat him into confessing to a crime he says he didn't commit.
Once we found out that the address was 1518 West Ontario, we took a drive over there, and actually it is a abandoned, it looks like a drug house.
Home there.
Yeah, home next to it, I think. But it just looks like somebody did a short rehab on it.
Right.
And put people in. But that door, that was all open. That door was actually ajar when we got there.
It was. Yeah. We walked right in.
Right. Once we saw the condition of it, we realized that it was exactly what Arthur had said it was. Every detail that he gave us about the residence was exact. I mean, it was true, even to a chair that was in the middle of the floor that was knocked over. But it's basically the same look to the house.
I just remember this whole area just looked so bad. Like, it was just bad.
That's where it all started. That's it. That's what put the ball rolling.
According to Colbert's complaint, Baird and Ryan illegally searched his apartment. When Williamson and Danback learn Colbert lives about 25 minutes away in Cheltenham, they know they're onto something. Cheltenham is well beyond Baird and Ryan's jurisdiction.
Philadelphia police officers patrol Philadelphia and respond to crime in Philadelphia, but they don't patrol over there. It's just not done.
We found a nurse who actually remembered coming out of her house to go to work and looking across the street and seeing a Philadelphia marked police car, which in her mind stuck out because that was a very unusual thing, and she knows standing on the front porch was a police officer.
When Danback and Williamson realized the nurse had a clear view of the officer, they pull out a photo display.
And she picked him out, that it was Thomas Ryan.
That was a pivotal moment, and it all just starts to come together.
FBI agent Jim Williamson and police detective James Danback have corroborated much of Arthur Colbert's account of what happened to him the night of February 24, 1991. They also have proof that officers Jack Baird and Tom Ryan abused their power and operated outside the lines of justice. But is this just an isolated case of police misconduct, or is it more widespread? Williamson and Danback turned their attention to Baird.
I think we reviewed something like 14 different performance reviews, and his performance reviews were all indicated that he was a highly effective police officer. But when you look at this individual, he had an extraordinary number of complaints lodged against him from citizens that he had come across.
Those complaints date back nearly 10 years.
We found out there was over 23 complaints against Jack Baird. If you're doing your job, you're going to get a complaint. I mean, even I've had a complaint. But that number was high.
The recurring theme of those complaints, a lot of them were physical violence. And, when you start to look at Arthur Colbert's allegations and then look at the litany of complaints against him, you start to see this pattern tended to lend a lot of credence to what Arthur Colbert had alleged. and you realize this is bigger than just Arthur Colbert. In totality, sort of painted this picture of Baird, who was a man on the edge and capable of almost anything.
They discovered that every complaint against Baird has been dismissed, leaving him clear of any wrongdoing.
Very often this becomes a police officer said, citizen said procedure. There is no clear evidence that this happened, and it was easy to put aside complaints. There was, and there still is, this tendency to protect the officers.
But as Williamson and Danback look into the corresponding arrest reports, they find some troubling discrepancies.
I noticed that there was a mistake on almost all the property receipts. They actually inputted that they submitted the evidence to the evidence custodian prior to taking it.
Property was being logged before the arrest occurred, and Jim would have the police department verify, and we started to find that there was property missing. Jewelry, cash, things like that. You could maybe say 1, 2, 3 times as an error, but it appeared that, this is some kind of a by design thing. This is not just a mistake.
Baird is stealing from the people he arrests.
At that point, we realized that we were on to more than just a civil rights case, and that it was a criminal case.
But that's not all. Baird has been falsifying reports to frame innocent citizens.
You would see a pattern in their affidavits for probable cause. The address and the dates, and sometimes even the typos were the same. It's just like, no, this didn't happen. This could not have happened. And, you saw that pattern repeated over and over and over again.
And what they find is more than just a handful of cases. Way more.
It was hundreds of cases.
On top of that, Williamson and Danback noticed it's not just Baird's name on the falsified reports. Other officers from the 5 Squad are frequently listed, including Tommy Ryan, Stephen Brown, and the Sergeant Thomas DeGiovanni.
It was always the same group of officers. It seemed that the civil rights violations were a symptom of an insidious, systematic problem.
At that time, it became much more than what we expected it would be. It was a huge scandal.
They violated the laws. They willingly, circumvented people's rights as citizens, and they did it for personal gain.
You can walk down the street and find yourself in jail for the rest of your life, for no reason.
In North Philadelphia, residents live in fear of a group of officers tasked with keeping drugs off the streets.
They would hit people. They would pull guns on them. It was hardcore stuff.
One of the early stories was about a grandmother who they arrested. Her name was Betty Patterson. And they arrested her because they wanted to arrest her sons. And this would be a way to put pressure on their sons.
They definitely would show the neighborhood who was boss.
They were known by a number of names, but one was the Four Horsemen. And the Four Horsemen is a biblical term. And these officers were given this name by the community because the Four Horsemen were those biblically that bring damage to a community. And I think that was how they were viewed. They had power, and people on the street typically did not have power.
It seems no one is safe in North Philly with the Four Horsemen on the loose. They've taken their job to clean up the streets and turned it into a rogue enterprise hungry for power. But the biggest question remains: why would these veteran officers take such aggressive and illegal measures in the name of fighting crime?
I think it's just a mindset that it doesn't belong to the people we're taking it from, and why should we give it to the city? We need it more than they do.
Nobody really took notice of it because they were producing. But their reason was not to be good investigators or good police officers, it was to steal money.
One of the driving forces in the initial stages of corruption was the drive for overtime hours, because they could earn more with the more they arrested. And they could arrest more people if they didn't follow the rules.
So they were circumventing the Bill of Rights, basically, by doing illegal search and seizures, and all in the name of, the war on drugs. And I think just over time, it just becomes a little bit here, a little bit there, and a little bit more, and pretty soon it's all out. I'm taking what I can.
I think basically they got into a bad pattern, a slippery slope, as they say. So they just continue on that path until they made a mistake of stopping Arthur Colbert.
After months of work compiling evidence against the Four Horsemen, Williamson and Danback decide it's time to make a move. Their plan: approach one of the officers and convince them to cooperate. They consult with FBI behavior experts at Quantico and pick Tommy Ryan. They believe he's the weakest link.
He was not a player type. He was more the go-along.
They determined that he would be very susceptible to displays and props, if you will. So we developed this 3-ring binder with just everything that we had learned or could find that was all about Tom Ryan. We basically put FBI police decals on the front of it. And when it was all said and done, this 3-ring binder was probably about that thick. It was heavy and it was very impressive looking.
But confronting Ryan is a risky move.
The investigation could be blown at that point. There was no practice for this. This was our first time. We had to get it right.
FBI agent Jim Williamson and Philadelphia police detective James Danback are gearing up to confront Officer Tommy Ryan with the mountain of evidence they have gathered against him. They want Ryan to agree to cooperate and spill the dirt on the other officers. But if he doesn't, their whole investigation could go up in smoke.
We had put a tremendous amount of work into things to ensure our success at that point.
In August 1994, Williamson and Danback go to Ryan's house.
You have the FBI and a police detective at your door telling you that you're going to be indicted.
We sat down at his dining room table and quietly pulled out that enormous book and just set it on the tabletop, and you could just see him physically recoil.
It's like somebody takes the air out of you when you do that, because it's over, that your world is going to change and it's not going to be good, and it's time to maybe help yourself.
Staring at the stack of evidence against him, Ryan sees that he's only got one option if he wants to save himself. He agrees to flip.
And we did probably 6 to 10 sessions with Tom, who has confirmed and corroborated Arthur Colbert's story and the other stories. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we can start to build a case against Jack Baird.
With Ryan in their pockets, Williamson and Danback now have first-hand testimony against Baird. And they believe it's enough to convince Baird to turn on the rest of his crew.
Of all the people in that group, he would be the one that would be able to provide us the most information. Plus, he was the one we had the most evidence on. So we went and approached Jack.
That was a very dicey, touch-and-go, nerve-wracking moment when we approached him.
He was in an apartment up in the Northeast, and we decided to go there. And we knocked on the door, he opened it, and it was really as if he was expecting us.
We were forearmed with lots of information, very damning information. He was savvy enough to not initially, say much.
Baird doesn't take the bait.
And we said, okay, so that was our shot.
But later that night, Baird calls and asks to meet the pair at a local bar.
We knew we had another shot at this, and we went up and met him, and he agreed to cooperate, and of course tried to dictate terms, how it was going to go down. He wasn't going to do any time, and that wasn't happening.
With Baird's cooperation secured, Williamson and Danback are on the cusp of exposing the entire operation.
Of all the people, we now have the leader of the group that did this, and he knows people all over the city, and he knows what people have done and haven't done.
Once Baird agreed to cooperate, the floodgates opened up. Jack Baird sat down with us, and over the course of several months, we literally reviewed every arrest that he did.
Ringleader or not, Baird is quick to turn on his fellow officers.
He laid out incredible stories of things that happened, and things not only that they were doing to steal money and search warrants and plant drugs on people, but it turns out that they were actually cheating each other in money.
The disputed cases number more than 2,000, spanning 6 years.
He had a mind that was like a steel trap. He remembered almost every job, but we gave him an address. He could tell us exactly what occurred there, how much money they took, who did what.
He might not remember the defendant, but he would go, oh yeah, that one. We got $1,800 out of it. We turned in, $200.
As Williamson and Danback listen to account after account of misconduct, the list of illegal violations pile up, from theft to fraud to tampering with police evidence.
One instance, they had come across a large sum of money, $50,000. And when Jack found it, he got a large trash bag, and he put $45,000 in the bottom of the trash bag, and then he put another trash bag on top of that, and put the remainder of the money in there. And of course, when he comes out holding this bag of money, everybody's like, oh, what'd you find? And he would basically open the bag up, and there would be the $5,000 or whatever it was in the bag, and they'd be like, oh wow, that's crazy, and then he would go out to his vehicle, open up the trunk, put the bag in there, and then he would pick out one of the ancillary officers and say, hey, I got plenty of court time, you want to be part of this, get a little overtime, why don't you take possession of the money? And they're like, oh yeah, great, thanks. And he pulled out the inner bag, hands it to that officer, and the officer's like, oh, look at that, and thank you, and court time. And Jack would shut the trunk and then drive away.
It's those details that allow Williamson and Danback to build cases against the others.
And he would literally detail all these instances, and his memory was just incredible.
It was really what put us over the top. What happens is Jack Baird tells you about somebody that you don't even have on your radar that he did something with. So the information he was giving us led to investigations that just branched out, and it was spreading out rapidly at that point.
It appears the Justice Department probe of corruption here is far from over. Some unofficial estimates are that over 24 more present or former officers from the 39th District could ultimately get busted in this scandal.
The investigation started with the 39th District, but it was very clear that this was a widespread problem. People were being arrested from a variety of units.
It was big. I mean, to me, it was an unexpectedly larger case than we thought it was going to be, but it was bad. It was a mess for everybody.
On February 28, 1995, after a 4-year investigation, indictments are brought against Jack Baird, Tommy Ryan, Stephen Brown, Thomas DeGiovanni, and one other member of the Five Squad, James Ryan. The charges include conspiracy, obstruction of justice, rights violations, and stealing over $100,000 from civilians.
As we put together, I think it was 234 counts of an indictment against that group of people from the Fly Squad, including Baird.
If you look at the actual indictment, it was in excess of $100,000 total cash. The actual figure, I'm sure, was probably much higher than that, but those are the cases that we charged and could prove. That once the indictment hit in '95, this case was literally in the paper every day.
I had seen things in the paper about the police corruption investigation. It was a big story, no doubt about it. Most of my clients were frightened and justifying what they did or wanting to explain to someone what had happened to them. But Jack Baird was an exception to this. He was not emotional in the slightest, so he may have felt remorse, but I didn't see any sign of emotion at all.
All 5 of the indicted officers plead guilty. On April 15, 1996, they are together in a packed courtroom to hear the judge hand down their sentences.
Jack's cooperation had been extensive. His cooperation led to guilty pleas on the part of other police officers, so I expected him to get a year and a half in jail.
But instead of rewarding Baird for cooperating, the judge slaps him with a whopping 13 years.
There were gasps all around the courtroom when the judge actually delivered the sentence. I thought it was outrageously over the top.
One by one, the judge sentences the other officers. James Ryan, 6 years. Tommy Ryan, 10 months. Thomas DeGiovanni, 7 years. Stephen Brown, 10 years.
And Jack Baird was the leader, and didn't surprise me in the least that he got the most time in jail. The amount of time, of course, was stunning.
Eventually, 4 additional officers are charged and convicted. As a result of the investigation, nearly 2,000 cases are re-examined, and more than 160 convictions are overturned.
These are huge numbers, but what was very clear is that people did not receive fair trials.
And I'm thankful that in my case, the officers were imprisoned, which they should have been. My complaint helped a lot of people to get out of prison. Many people were let out of jail. So I'm happy about that.
In the end, the city of Philadelphia is forced to pay millions in wrongful arrest settlements. And the level of corruption goes down as one of the biggest and most expensive in Philadelphia history.
It's a disappointment that we continuously see these police scandals.
It's a tiny, tiny percentage, but that tiny percentage does a huge amount of harm to police departments and trust with the police department.
Every place has corruption, but this one seemed to really strike a chord with the city. It was one of the worst cases that the city has ever experienced.